The sun shone brightly that morning, as if celebrating our move with us. My name is Emily, and with my husband Jacques, we had just crossed the threshold of our new house. It was a charming 2-story house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood in the Paris suburbs. As soon as I laid eyes on the small front garden, my mind soared, already imagining the beds of roses and lavender I was going to plant there. We had worked hard to get to this point. Jacques, an engineer by profession, had worked overtime, while I, a French teacher in a high school, had given private lessons in the evening. Every penny saved brought us closer to our dream. And now, as we stood there, hand in hand, admiring the freshly painted walls and listening to the echo of our footsteps on the oak floors, I felt a wave of pride wash over me. "We did it, my darling," Jacques whispered, placing a kiss on my temple. His voice was laced with palpable emotion, a mixture of joy and relief. I nodded, unable to speak as my throat was so tight with emotion. We started unpacking the boxes, little by little filling the empty rooms of our lives. Every object found its place, transforming this house into our home. As I unpacked our favorite books to put them in the living room bookcase, a wave of anxiety suddenly washed over me. It was our first home together, the place where we would build our lives, maybe even start a family. What if we weren't up to it? Jacques, always optimistic, seemed to read my thoughts. He came closer to me, put his hands on my shoulders and turned me around so that I looked him in the eyes. "It's going to be okay, Emily. We're together, that's all that matters." His warm smile and the gentle pressure of his hand on mine were enough to ease my fears, at least for the moment. As we continued to settle in, an idea came to me. How about we invite your parents to lunch this weekend? To celebrate our move? I suggested. Jacques hesitated for a moment, a shadow passing over his face. I knew that relations with his family, in particular with his mother Marguerite, were sometimes tense. But I sincerely thought that this new beginning was the perfect opportunity to strengthen our family ties. "Are you sure? You know how my mother can be," Jacques began, but I interrupted him with a wave of my hand. "Precisely, it's an opportunity to start again on new bases. And then, your father will be there too. It will go well, you'll see." I was trying to appear more confident than I really was. The truth is that Marguerite had always intimidated me, with her piercing gaze and her thinly veiled comments. But I was determined to make an effort to integrate him into our new life. Jacques eventually accepted, and we spent the next few days preparing this lunch. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the menu to the table decoration. I opted for a simple but elegant meal, roast beef with Provence herbs, accompanied by dauphinoise potatoes and homemade ratatouille. For dessert, I decided to prepare a strawberry tart, knowing that it was the favorite of Thomas, Jacques' father. The day before the big day, while I was putting the final touches to the decoration of the living room, arranging a bouquet of freshly picked peonies in the vase that my grandmother had given me, Jacques surprised me by hugging me from behind. "You know you don't need to do that much, right?" he whispered in my ear. "My parents already love you." I turned around in his arms, resting my head against his chest. "I know, but I want everything to be perfect. It's important to me that your family feels good here." I did not admit to him that I secretly hoped to impress Marguerite, to finally win her approval. That night I slept poorly, my mind spinning over and over all the possible scenarios for the next day. What if the roast is overcooked? What if Marguerite found fault with the decoration? What if? Jacques, sensing my agitation, held me against him, his regular breathing on my neck eventually soothing me and allowing me to fall into a light sleep. The morning of the big day finally arrived. I got up at dawn, unable to stay in bed any longer. The house was silent, Jacques still sleeping soundly. I tiptoed out of the bedroom and went down to the kitchen. There I got to work, preparing the dough for the pie, peeling the potatoes, marinating the meat. The activity helped me channel my anxiety. Little by little, the house filled with tempting smells. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with that of the bread I had just taken out of the oven. Jacques ends up joining me, attracted by the promising aromas. He kissed me tenderly before he too got to work, vacuuming and making sure every corner of the house was spotless. As noon approached, I went upstairs to get ready, carefully choosing a simple but elegant blue dress. I had just finished applying light makeup when the doorbell rang. My heart leapt in my chest. They were there. I walked down the stairs, taking a deep breath to calm my nerves. Jacques was already opening the door, welcoming his parents with a big smile. Thomas entered first, his round face lit up by a warm smile. "Ah, my little Emily," he exclaimed, taking me in his arms. His fatherly embrace comforted me instantly. Then came Marguerite. Tall, elegant in her pearl grey suit, she entered with measured steps. His eyes, the same piercing blue as Jacques, quickly scanned the entrance before settling on me. I stepped forward, a smile that I hoped was natural on my lips. "Hello, Marguerite. We are so happy to have you here." She kissed me, her lips barely touching my cheeks. "Hello, Emily. This house looks lovely." His tone was polite, but I could sense a certain reserve in his voice. I choose to ignore this, keeping my smile in place as I lead them towards the living room. "Come, sit down. Jacques, can you serve the aperitif while I go get the appetizers?" I said, happy to have an excuse to escape to the kitchen for a while. There, I took a few seconds to breathe deeply, urging myself to calm down. "Everything's going to be okay," I muttered to myself before returning to the living room, a tray of smoked salmon and fresh goat's cheese toast in hand. The conversation began to liven up around glasses of Cœur and Petit Fours. Thomas complimented the house warmly, raving about the charm of the neighborhood. "You chose really well," he said, raising his glass. "To your new home." Marguerite remained more reserved, sipping her Cœur in silence, her eyes scrutinizing every detail of the living room. I felt his gaze lingering on the abstract painting we had hung above the fireplace, a gift from my parents when we moved in. I wondered what she thought, but didn't dare ask her. When it came time to sit down at the table, I was relieved to see that everyone seemed to like the meal. Thomas raved about the roast, even asking for the recipe. Even Marguerite seemed to appreciate it, although she ate with aristocratic restraint. Emboldened by the seemingly relaxing atmosphere, I decided to talk about my plans for the garden. "I thought about planting some rose bushes along the fence," I explained enthusiastically. "And maybe a little vegetable garden at the back. What do you think, Marguerite? You who have a green thumb." Marguerite put down her fork, looking at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Gardening takes a lot of time and effort, Emily. Are you sure you have some with your work?" I fell. Jacques tense up next to me. "Mom," he started, but I put my hand on his arm. "I am aware of that," I replied calmly. "But it's a passion of mine. I'll find the time." The conversation then drifted towards more neutral subjects: Jacques' work, the latest news from the neighborhood where his parents lived. I began to relax, thinking that the hardest part was over. But I didn't yet know that the real storm was about to break. The meal was coming to an end, and I was starting to relax slightly. Perhaps my fears had been exaggerated after all. It was then that Marguerite placed her napkin on the table and stood up, her gaze scanning the room. "Emily, could you show me around the house?" she asked in a tone that sounded more like an order than a request. I glanced quickly at Jacques, who shrugged his shoulders slightly. "Of course, Marguerite," I replied, getting up as well. "Follow me, I'll show you." We started on the ground floor. I showed him the living room, trying to explain our decorating choices. "We wanted to create a warm and welcoming atmosphere," I said, pointing to the soft colors of the walls and the comfortable furniture. Marguerite nodded, her face betraying no emotion. "That's interesting," was his only comment. We moved on to the kitchen, which I had spent hours cleaning and organizing. "We were lucky to find a fitted kitchen," I explained. "The previous owners had recently renovated it." Marguerite murmured, running a finger over the counter as if to check for dust. "I hope you know how to maintain this properly." I felt a pang of irritation rise within me, but I suppressed it. "Of course, we do our best to keep everything in good condition." We went upstairs. I showed him the bathroom, then our bedroom. Marguerite stopped in front of the chest of drawers, where there was a photo of Jacques and me during our engagement. "Ah, I remember that day," she said, a note of nostalgia in her voice. "Jacques looked so happy." "We both were," I replied softly. "We still are." Marguerite turned to me, her eyes searching my face. Are you really sure about that, Emily? I was taken aback by this direct question. Of course I'm sure. Why would you doubt that? She sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. Jacques was always a brilliant boy, you know. He could have done so much more. I felt my heart tighten. What do you mean? Well, this house, this job. It's not exactly what I imagined for him. He could have aimed higher, had a more prestigious career. But since he met you, his words hit me like a slap. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Jacques is happy in his work, Marguerite. And we are happy together. Isn't that the most important thing? She stood up, smoothing her skirt mechanically. Happiness is fleeting, my dear. Stability and success last. We went back downstairs in silence, joining Jacques and Thomas, who were chatting in the living room. I could feel the tension in the air, as if a storm threatened to erupt at any moment. So, Mom, what do you think? Jacques asked, a nervous smile on his lips. Marguerite took her time to answer, sitting gracefully in the chair. It's lovely, she said finally. But I worry, darling. Is this really what you want? Jacques frowned. What do you mean? Well, this house, this neighborhood. It's not exactly what we imagined for you, is it? She cast a pointed look in my direction. I wonder if some choices weren't rushed. I felt my face turn red. How dare she question our decisions, our lives? Jacques must have sensed my discomfort because he took my hand in his, squeezing it gently. Mom, he said firmly, Emily and I are very happy here. It's exactly what we wanted. Thomas, feeling the tension rising, tried to lighten the atmosphere. Come on, Marguerite, don't be so harsh. They made an excellent choice. This house is perfect for them. But Marguerite was not finished. Thomas, don't be naive. Look around you. Is this really what our son deserves? I couldn't contain myself any longer. With all due respect, Marguerite, this is our house. Jacques and I chose it together, and we are proud of it. She turned to me, her eyes flashing. Oh yes. And how were you able to afford it, exactly? I imagine Jacques' savings must have helped a lot. I felt anger rising within me. We both worked hard to buy this house. Each contributed equally. Marguerite laughed without joy. Really? A simple high school teacher who earns as much as an engineer? Let me doubt it. That's enough, Mom, cried Jacques, standing up abruptly. You're going too far. But Marguerite was launched. She stood up in turn, pointing an accusing finger at me. No, Jacques, it's you who can't see clearly. This girl has manipulated you from the start. She took you away from your family, from your ambitions. Look where you are now. I stood speechless, unable to believe what I was hearing. How could she think that of me? From us. Marguerite, please, Thomas intervened, trying to calm his wife. This is neither the place nor the time for this kind of discussion. But she ignored him, continuing her tirade. You could have had so much better, Jacques. A woman from a good family, a brilliant career in Paris. Instead, you are content with this. She made a dismissive gesture encompassing the entire room. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I think you should leave, I said in a shaky but firm voice. Oh, are you kicking me out now? Sneered Marguerite. What an exemplary daughter-in-law you are. Jacques stepped between his mother and me. Mom, I ask you to apologize to Emily. Right away. Marguerite looked at him, stunned. Excuse me? But anyway, Jacques, I'm only telling the truth. This girl is not made for you. She's dragging you down. That's not true. Jacques shouted, finally losing his calm. Emily is the best thing that ever happened to me. She supports me, encourages me. Thanks to her, I found the courage to pursue my own dreams, not the ones you had for me. A heavy silence fell over the room. Marguerite looked at her son as if she were seeing him for the first time. Thomas, feeling uncomfortable, stood up and placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. Come on, darling. I think it's time for us to leave. But Marguerite did not move. She stared at Jacques, then at me, her face changing from anger to confusion to something that almost looked like fear. You can't be serious, Jacques. Everything I did was for your own good. Jacques shook his head, his voice softening slightly. I know you think you're acting for my good, Mom. But you have to understand that my life belongs to me. My choices, my decisions. And Emily is one of those choices. I approached Jacques, slipping my hand into his. He squeezed her tightly, as if to draw strength from this contact. Marguerite looked at us, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. But she disappeared as quickly as she appeared. Very well, she said finally, her voice cold and distant. If that's how you see it, Jacques, I have nothing more to say. She headed towards the front door, Thomas close on her heels. Before leaving, she turned around one last time. I hope you won't regret your choice, my son. The door closed behind them, leaving a deafening silence in the house. Jacques. Hughes and I stood still for what seemed like an eternity, holding hands, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Jacques turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I took him in my arms, feeling his body tremble slightly against mine. It's not your fault, I whispered. We will get through this together. As we stood embracing in the driveway of our new home, I couldn't help but wonder if this day would mark a new beginning or the end of something. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the disastrous visit from Jacques' parents were tense. We tried to get our lives back to normal, but the shadow of this confrontation hung over us like a dark cloud. Jacques was particularly affected. I often caught him lost in thought, his gaze vague, as if he were constantly replaying the scene in his head. One evening, while we were having dinner in silence, I decided to break the ice. Jacques, I began gently, we need to talk about this. He looked up from his plate, looking tired. What do you want to talk about, Emily? About what happened with your mother? About us? About all of this? I made a gesture encompassing the room, our house, our life. Jacques sighed deeply. What do you want me to tell you? My mother crossed the line, she insulted you, she questioned our life choices. I don't know how to fix this. I placed my hand on his. We don't need to fix anything right away. But we can't continue like this, pretending everything is fine while we're walking on eggshells. He nodded, squeezing my hand in return. You're right. It's just. I don't understand why my mother acts like that. She was never easy, but this was different. Maybe she's scared, I suggested. Fear of losing yourself, fear of change. Jacques laughed bitterly. Afraid of losing me? She does everything to push me to the limit. I think for a moment before answering. People sometimes do irrational things when they're afraid. It doesn't justify his behavior, but it might explain it. We remained silent for a moment, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Jacques spoke again. Maybe I should talk to him, try to understand. My heart sank at the thought. On the one hand, I knew it was probably the right thing to do. On the other, I was afraid. Fear that Marguerite would succeed in manipulating Jacques, in convincing him that I was really an obstacle to his development. Are you sure this is a good idea? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jacques must have sensed my concern because he got up and came to kneel next to my chair, taking my hands in his. Emily, look at me, he said softly. I obeyed, looking into his gaze. No matter what happens, no matter what my mother says, it won't change how I feel about you. You are my life, my future. Never doubt that. His words warmed my heart, but a little voice deep inside me continued to worry. What if Marguerite was right? What if I really held Jacques back? In the following days, Jacques tried to contact his mother several times, but she did not answer his calls. Her father, Thomas, would sometimes respond, apologizing for his wife's behavior and promising that things would get better in time. But time passed, and nothing seemed to get better. One Saturday morning, while we were having breakfast, Jacques' phone rang. He looked at the screen, surprised, then quickly answered. Mom! I froze, watching Jacques' face carefully as he listened to his mother speak. His expression changed from surprise to worry to resignation. Okay, Mom. Yes, I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible. He hung up and turned to me, looking serious. My mother isn't feeling well. She wants to see me. My heart sank. Do you want me to come with you? Jacques shook his head. I think it's best if I go alone this time. This might be a chance to clear things up. I nodded, trying to hide my apprehension. Okay. Take care of yourself, okay? He kissed me tenderly before leaving. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. The hours that followed were endless. I tried to keep myself busy, tidy up the house, correct papers, but my mind kept coming back to Jacques and his mother. What could they possibly say to each other? Was Marguerite still trying to convince him that I was bad for him? Finally, late in the afternoon, I heard the front door open. I rushed into the hallway, anxious to see Jacques, to read in his face what had happened. He looked exhausted, his features drawn, but there was something else in his eyes. A kind of determination I haven't seen in a long time. Jacques? I asked softly. How did it go? He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. It was intense. My mother wasn't really sick. She just wanted to talk to me one-on-one. My heart sank. And, what did she tell you? Jacques took my hand and led me to the living room. We sat side by side on the couch. She tried to convince me to leave the house, to leave you. I felt my blood freeze in my veins. What? He squeezed my hand tighter. Don't worry, I told her it was out of the question. But she didn't want to let go. She brought up every possible argument imaginable. That you were holding me back, that I was wasting my potential, that I would end up regretting it. Tears came to my eyes. Jacques, He interrupted me gently. Let me finish, please. My mother said all these things, and for a moment I was afraid. Not of what she was saying, but of realizing how much she didn't know me, how much she didn't know us. I looked at him, surprised. It wasn't what I expected. I tried to explain to her, he continued, that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. That because of you, I found the courage to pursue my own dreams, not the ones she had for me. But she didn't want to hear. What happened next? I asked, my throat tight. Jacques took a deep breath. I told her that if she can't accept my choices, accept the woman I love, then maybe it's best we distance ourselves for a while. I looked at him, speechless. You did that. He nodded, looking both sad and determined. I couldn't continue like this, Emily. I can't let her treat you like this, treat us like this. Our happiness matters more than her unrealistic expectations. I didn't know what to say. I was touched by his loyalty, but also worried about the consequences. And how did she react? Bad, Jacques admitted. She screamed, cried, accused me of being an ungrateful son. My father tried to calm things down, but it didn't really work. I left when I realized the discussion was going nowhere. Leaves. I took Jacques in my arms, feeling his tense body relax slightly at my touch. I'm sorry, I whispered. I know how hard this must be for you. He hugged me tightly against him. Don't be sorry. It's not your fault. It's my mother who must learn to respect my choices, our choice. We remained in this embrace for a long time, each drawing comfort from the presence of the other. Finally, I stood up, looking Jacques in the eyes. What do we do now? I asked. He sighed. I don't know exactly, but I do know one thing. We're going to get through this together. No matter what happens, we stay together. I nodded, feeling a wave of determination rise within me. Together, I repeated. That night, as we lay in bed, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about the future. The road would undoubtedly be difficult. The tension with Jacques' family would not disappear overnight. But feeling the warmth of his body against mine, listening to his steady breathing, I knew we were strong enough to overcome these obstacles. Just before falling asleep, I made myself a promise. Whatever happens, I will do everything to prove Marguerite that she was wrong. I would show everyone that the love Jacques and I shared was a strength, not a weakness. And maybe one day, she would finally understand and accept our happiness. With this resolution in mind, I closed my eyes, ready to face whatever the future had in store. The tension was far from dissipated, but at least Jacques and I were on the same wavelength. And for now, that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed were strangely calm. Too calm, perhaps. Jacques and I had returned to our daily routine, but there was an underlying tension, as if we were walking on a thin layer of ice, fearing at any moment that it would break beneath our feet. Jacques had not heard from his mother since their confrontation. His father, Thomas, called from time to time, awkwardly trying to mediate. But these conversations always left Jacques frustrated and dejected. One evening, while we were having dinner, the phone rang. Jacques looked at the screen and his face tightened. "That's my mother," he said, his voice tense. I felt my heart speed up. "You want me to leave you?" I suggested, ready to get up. He shook his head. "No, stay. I want you to hear." He put the phone on speaker and answered. "Hello, Mom?" Marguerite's voice echoed in the room, cold and distant. "Jacques, we need to talk. Your father and I are worried about you." Jacques sighed. "Mom, we've already discussed it. I'm fine, Emily is fine, we're happy." "Happy?" Marguerite's tone was incredulous. "How can you be happy while wasting your potential? You could have had so much more, Jacques." I saw Jacques' fists clench on the table. "I didn't ruin anything, Mom. I made my own choices, choices that make me happy." "Any choices?" His voice rose a notch. "You call that choices? This girl manipulated you from the start. She took you away from us, from your ambitions." I felt anger rising within me, but I remained silent. "It wasn't my place to intervene, not now. Emily didn't keep me away from anything at all," Jacques replied, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "It's because of her that I found the courage to pursue my own dreams, not the ones you had for me." There was silence on the other end of the line, then Marguerite continued, her voice softer but still full of reproach. "Jacques, my darling, I know you think you love her. But love is not enough. You have to think about the future, your career, the family you could have with a woman from our background." I felt my heart tighten at these words. Was that really what Marguerite thought of me? That I wasn't good enough for his son, not enough to give him a family? Jacques stood up abruptly, making his chair squeak on the floor. "That's enough, Mom. I don't want to hear this anymore. Emily is the woman I love, the woman I want to spend my life with. If you can't accept it, then maybe it's better let's not talk to each other for a while." "Jacques." Marguerite's voice was now tinged with panic. "You can't be serious. Would you choose this girl over your own family?" "It's not a choice you should force me to make," Jacques replied, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "But if you force me, then yes, I choose Emily. I choose our life together." There was a long silence, then we heard Marguerite burst into tears. "My God, what did I do to deserve this? My own son turning his back on me." I saw Jacques waver, his face a mixture of guilt and determination. I knew he suffered from this situation, that he loved his mother deeply despite everything. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm not turning my back on you. I just want you to accept my choices, to accept Emily." But Marguerite did not seem to hear him. Her sobs turned into accusations. "It's her fault. She turned you against us. She destroyed our family. It was too much." Before I could stop myself, I stood up and walked over to the phone. "Marguerite," I said, my voice firmer than I thought possible, "I understand that you are upset, but you cannot continue like this. Your son loves you, and I love him too. We want you to be a part of our lives, but not like this." There was a moment of shocked silence, then Marguerite exploded. "How dare you? What right do you have to interfere in this conversation? You are nothing, you hear? Nothing." Jacques intervened, his voice trembling with anger. "That's enough, Mom. You have no right to talk to Emily like that. I won't let you insult her." "Insult him?" cried Marguerite. "She's the one who insults us. She's the one who destroys everything we've built for you." The situation was deteriorating quickly. I could see Jacques losing his composure, his eyes flashing with anger and pain. I put my hand on his arm, trying to calm him down, but he got out gently. "Mom," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "I'm going to hang up now. When you are ready to have a real conversation, to listen to us really, Emily and me, so you can remind us. But not before." "Jacques, no." Marguerite's voice was panicked now. "Don't do that, please. But Jacques had already pressed the button to end the call. The silence that followed was deafening. We remained motionless during what seemed to be an eternity, the telephone posed between us on the table as a cursed object. Finally, Jacques collapsed on his chair, his head in his hands. I knelt next to him, gently putting my hand on his knee. "Jacques," I whispered, "I'm so sorry." He looked up, his eyes brilliant with contained tears. "No, I'm sorry. You should never have heard that. My mother. I don't know what takes her." I took her hands in mine. "She is afraid," I said gently. "Fear of getting lost, afraid of change. It doesn't justify his behavior, but it may explain it." Jacques shook his head, the air shot. "I don't know what to do, Emily. I like my mother, but I can't let her treat us like that. I can't let her treat you like that." I felt my heart swells with love and gratitude to this wonderful man. "We will find a solution, I promise. Together." He looked at me, a weak smile appearing on his face. "Together," he repeated. We spent the rest of the evening entwined on the sofa, speaking little but drawing comfort from the presence of the other. The tension of the day weighed heavily on us, but there was also a strange feeling of relief. The storm had broken out, and even if we did not yet know what the consequences would be, at least we had no longer to live in the constant anticipation of the explosion. The next morning, we woke up with frantic blows to the door. Still asleep, we went down to see who could come so early. When Jacques opened the door, we remained petrified. Marguerite stood there, looking haggard, eyes blushed by tears. "Jacques," she said in a broken voice, "I came to bring you back to reason." Before we could react, she rushed into the house, pushing Jacques aside. His eyes frantically swept the room before landing on me. "You," she cried, pointing an accusing finger in my direction. "You have spoiled everything." Jacques interposed between his mother and me. "Mom, stop it, Rig. HT away." But Marguerite was out of control. She began to browse the house, opening the cupboards, throwing objects on the ground. "I'm going to show you, Jacques," she shouted. "I'm going to show you that it is not good enough for you." Jacques was trying to calm her down, preventing her from breaking everything, but she was as possessed. I remained frozen, unable to believe what was going on before my eyes. Suddenly, Marguerite stopped net, holding in her hands the photo of our engagement that we kept preciously. She looked at her for a moment, then threw her violently against the wall. The glass broke into 1,000 pieces. It was as if something was also broken in Jacques. He grabbed his mother by shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Mom, stop now, or we're going to become beggars," he cried, his voice filled with despair and anger. The silence that followed was deafening. Marguerite looked at him, eyes wide, as if she saw him for the first time. Then, slowly, very slowly, she collapsed on the ground, bursting into sobs. Jacques and I exchanged a look, lost and shocked by the turn of events. What had happened? And above all, what should we do now? The silence that followed Jacques' brilliance was deafening. Marguerite, collapsed on the ground, sobbed gently, her shoulders shaken with spasms. Jacques, frozen on the spot, looked at her with a mixture of anger and sorrow. As for me, I was petrified, unable to move or speak. It was Thomas, the father of Jacques, who broke this suspended moment. He switches to the house, breathless and visibly worried. "Marguerite," he exclaimed when he saw his wife on the ground. He rushed to her, taking her in her arms. "What happened?" he asked, looking up at us. Jacques shook his head, as leaving a trance. "Dad. Mom arrived this morning and she lost control. She started breaking things, screaming." Thomas sighed deeply, tightening Marguerite against him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to prevent it, but she left before I could stop it." Slowly, I approached Jacques, putting one hand on his arm. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "What do we do now?" he whispered. I took a deep breath. "Maybe we should all sit down and talk calmly," I suggested slowly. Thomas granted. "It's a good idea. Marguerite, my darling, can you get up?" Marguerite nodded weakly, being guided by her husband to the sofa. Jacques and I settled in the armchairs in front of them. The atmosphere was heavy, loaded with emotions selected and unsaid. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Marguerite who broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said in a barely audible voice. We all looked at her, amazed. It was the first time that I had heard him apologize. I don't know what took me," she continued, eyes down. "I was so afraid." "Fear of what, Mom?" asked Jacques gently. Marguerite looked up at her son, and I was struck by the vulnerability I saw in her gaze. "Fear of losing you," she admitted. "Fear that you no longer need me." Jacques shook his head, incredulous. "Mom, how can you think that? You are my mother. I will always need you." "But everything changed so fast," replied Marguerite. "You bought this house, you built your life with Emily. I had the impression that you left us behind." I felt my heart tighten. Despite everything that had happened, I started to understand the pain of Marguerite. "Marguerite," I said slowly, "we never wanted to exclude you from our life. On the contrary, we wanted you to be part of it." She looked at me, surprised. "Really?" Jacques took my hand in his. "Of course, Mom. Emily and I want to build our own life, but that doesn't mean we want to leave you aside." Thomas then intervened. "Marguerite, do you remember what we felt when we got married? When we bought our first house?" Marguerite slowly nodded. "Yes, we were so excited, so full of hope. And your parents," continued Thomas, "they were worried, right? They thought I was not good enough for you." A weak smile appeared on Marguerite's face. "It's true. They thought you couldn't give me the life I deserved." "And what did you tell them?" asked Thomas. Marguerite closed her eyes, as if to remember this moment. "I told them it was my choice, that I loved you and that we would build our lives together." A silence settled while we all made the similarity of the situation. Jacques tightened my hand a little stronger. "Mom," he said slowly, "that's exactly what I am trying to tell you since the start. I like Emily. We build our life together, just as you did." Marguerite looked at us, Jacques and I, and for the first time, I saw her expression soften. I hadn't seen things from this angle," she admitted. "Marguerite," I say, bringing together all my courage, "I know that I may not be the daughter-in-law that you imagined for Jacques. But I love her with all my heart, and I will do everything for make it happy." She stared at me for a long time, and I retained my breath. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said gently. "Yes, that's what matters most." Jacques got up and knelt before his mother, taking his hands in his. "Mom, I love you. You will always be my mother, and you will always have an important place in my life. But you must understand that my life with Emily does not take anything away. On the contrary, that enriches her." Tears were freely flowing on Marguerite's cheeks now. "Oh, Jacques," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I was so stupid, so selfish." Jacques took her in her arms, and I felt my own eyes getting on tears. Thomas gave me a grateful little smile. When Jacques and her mother finally separated, Marguerite turned to me. "Emily," she said, her trembling but sincere voice, "I owe you excuses. My behavior was inexcusable. I hope that one day you can forgive me." I felt a huge weight getting up of my shoulders. "Of course, Marguerite," I replied. "We are a family now. Families forgive themselves." She nodded, a weak smile. "A family," she repeated. "Yes, I would like it very much." The rest of the day spent in a kind of emotional fog. We all stayed together, speaking, crying sometimes, but above all starting the long process of healing and reconstruction of our relationships. Towards the end of the afternoon, while Thomas and Marguerite were preparing to leave, Marguerite approached me. "Emily," she said gently, "I know I have a lot to forgive myself. But I hope we can go back on new bases. Maybe you could come to dine at home next week." I looked at Jacques, who nodded with an encouraging smile. "We would be delighted, Marguerite," I replied. After their departure, Jacques and I collapsed on the sofa, exhausted but relieved. "Do you think it's going to go now?" I asked, putting my head on his shoulder. He kissed my forehead tenderly. "I think yes. It will not be easy, there will probably still be difficult moments. But at least, now we are moving in the right direction." I closed my eyes, leaving the relief stood to me. This day had been a real emotional Russian mountain, but something had changed. A door was opened, offering the possibility of a new start. You know, I said after a while, your mother was not completely wrong on one thing. Jacques looked at me, intrigued. Ah, good. What? I smile. On the fact that you have great potential. You are brilliant, Jacques. And I want you to know that I will always be there to support you in your ambitions, whatever they are. He hugged me. I know, Emily. And it is thanks to you that I have the courage to continue my dreams. You are my strength, my inspiration. We thus remained entwined, contemplating the future that opened before us. A future which, for the first time for a long time, seemed full of promises and hope. The road would not always be easy, we knew it, but together we were ready to face all the challenges that arise. This day had been a revelation for all of us. She had shown us the fragility of family relationships, but also their strength and their ability to resilience. She had reminded us of the importance of communication, empathy, and forgiveness. As the sun was sleeping, bathed our living room in a soft golden light, I felt filled with a feeling of peace. We had crossed a storm, but we had come stronger, more united. And that was, in the end, the true sense of the family. The days following the confrontation with Marguerite were imbued with a strange tranquility. Jacques and I sailed in this new territory with caution, as if we were walking on eggs. The tension that had weighed over us for so long had dissipated, giving way to a mixture of hope and apprehension. The evening of dinner with Jacques' parents arrived faster than we had anticipated it. While we were preparing, I couldn't help but feel a certain nervousness. What if it goes bad? I asked Jacques while he was building his tie in front of the mirror. He turned to me, his gaze imbued with sweetness. It will go, Emily. We have crossed the hardest. Now, it's just about rebuilding little by little. I nodded, trying to absorb his optimism. You're right. It's just that. After all that happened, I find it hard to believe that things can become normal again. Jacques approached me and took my hands in his. They will not become normal again, they will be different. Best, I hope. We will create a new normality, together. His words comforted me, as always. I hoisted myself on tiptoe to kiss her tenderly. What would I do without you? I whispered against her lips. He smiles. Fortunately, you will never have to know. The journey to the house of Jacques' parents was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, it was Thomas who opened the door to us, a broad smile on his lips. Ah, here you are, he exclaimed, warmly hugging us. Enter, enter. Marguerite is in the kitchen, she finishes the meal. We followed it inside, the enticing smell of Marguerite's cuisine welcoming us. Jacques serred my hand, giving me courage before we entered the kitchen. Marguerite stood there, an apron tied around the waist, stirring a sauce on the fire. She turned to our entry, and I was struck by the expression of her face. There was nervousness, yes, but also a sweetness that I had never seen before. Jacques, Emily, she said gently. I'm so happy that you are there. There was a moment of floating, then Jacques advanced and took his mother in his arms. I looked at them, moved, feeling tears getting me in my eyes. When they separated, Marguerite turned to me. Emily, she said, I'm really happy that you came. I hesitated for a moment, then I walked in my turn. Thank you for inviting us, Marguerite. To my surprise, she attracted me to an awkward but sincere embrace. I hope you like the meal, she whispered. I did the dauphinois gratin. Jacques told me that it was your favorite dish. I looked at Jacques, surprised and touched. He winked at me. The dinner took place in a strangely relaxed atmosphere. The conversation was a little hesitant at the beginning, but little by little, we found our rhythm. We talked about everything and nothing, the work of Jacques, my students, the latest news in the neighborhood. It was almost normal. It was for dessert that Marguerite finally tackled the elephant in the room. I would still like to apologize, she said, putting her spoon. My behavior was inexcusable. We looked at her all, surprised by this sudden statement. Marguerite, I started, but she raised her hand to interrupt me. Please let me finish, she said. I have thought a lot in recent days. I realized how selfish and blind I had been. I only thought of myself, in my expectations, without ever considering your happiness. She turned to Jacques. My darling, I am so proud of the man that you have become. You found your way, you built your life, and I could not see it. I was so focused on what I wanted to you that I forgot to ask you what you wanted. Jacques had tears in his eyes. Mom, he whispered. Marguerite then turned to me. Emily, I owe you the greatest apologies. I was unfair and cruel to you. I judged without knowing, I condemned without understanding. I now see how happy you make my son, how much you encourage it and support it. I was speechless. I never imagined hearing such words from Marguerite's mouth. I felt tears run on my cheeks while I was looking for my words. Marguerite, I said finally, of course I forgive you. We are a family now, and families forgive themselves. She smiles at me, a real smile this time, warm and sincere. Thank you, Emily. I hope we can go back on new bases and get to know us really. Thomas, who had remained silent until then, spoke. I am so proud of all of you, he said, his voice charged with emotion. That's a real family. We make mistakes, we sometimes injure ourselves, but we always find the path of forgiveness and reconciliation. We raised our glasses, bringing a toast to this new start, to this new understanding that we had found. Later in the evening, while Jacques and Thomas chatted in the living room, I found myself alone with Marguerite in the kitchen, helping her to do the dishes. Emily, she said gently, I would like to ask you something. I looked at her, curious. Yes, I would like you to call me Mom, she said, almost timidly. If you don't mind, of course. I know that I do not deserve this title after my behavior, but I would really like to try to be a real mother for you. I felt my heart swells with emotion. I would be honored. Mom, I replied, testing the word on my language. The smile that lit up her face was worth all the gold in the world. When Jacques and I returned home that night, we were exhausted but happy. Lying in our bed, we thought about everything that had happened in recent weeks. It's incredible as things have changed, I whispered, nestled against Jacques. He gently stroked my hair. Yes, it's true. But what do you know? I think that all that made us stronger. Our love, our family, we went through the test and we got out of it. I looked up towards him, moved by the depth of his words. You are right. We have overcome it together, and now the future seems so bright. Jacques smiles, his eyes brilliant in the dark. Speaking of the future, he said, a bit nervous. There is something I would like to tell you about. I straightened up, suddenly alert. What's it? He took a deep inspiration. Well, with everything that happened, I thought a lot. About us, our life, what I really want. He marked a break, looking for his words. Emily, you are the best thing that has happened to me. You make me better every day, you push me to be the best version of myself. And I realized that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. My heart began to beat the chamade as I started to understand where he was coming from. Jacques got up from the bed and knelt next to me, taking out a small box from his pajamas pocket. Emily, he said, opening the box to reveal a magnificent ring, do you want to marry me? The tears sank freely on my cheeks while I looked at the man I loved, this man who had crossed so many trials by my side, who had chosen me again and again despite the obstacles. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible as the emotion flooded me. Then, stronger. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Jacques slipped the ring to my finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then he attracted me in his arms, kissing me with a passion and a tenderness that breathes my breath. As we separate, forehead, I couldn't help but laugh gently. Your mother is going to be crazy about joy, I said. Jacques laughs in turn. She already knows it. I asked her blessing this afternoon. She even helped me choose the ring. I looked at the ring again on my finger, moved by this gesture, by all that he symbolized. It was not only Jacques and I who were committed to each other, it was our whole family that united in this love. That night, entwined in our bed, we were talking about our future, our dreams, the family we wanted to build. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely in peace, completely in my place. We had crossed the storm, confronted our fears and our prejudices, and we were loudly more united. Our love had been put to the test and had triumphed. And now, a new chapter of our life opened up before us, full of promises and hope. While I fell asleep in the arms of my fiancé, I knew with certainty that whatever the future has in store for us, we would face it together, supported by the love of our newly united family. Because that's a real family, a refuge in the storm, a haven of peace and unconditional love. And now, finally, we had found ours.